Happy holidays and welcome back. When one considers the greatest engineering feats of all time, one might think about the construction of the pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, or the aqueduct networks of Rome. In a more modern times, one might think of the Panama or Suez Canals, the Trans-Siberian Railway, or the American highway system. For contemporary feats, one might think of the stretches of fiber optic cables under the oceans, or network of satellites built that orbit Earth, or even the Three Gorges Dam. Any of all of these things are incredible feats that have stunned the world in their time and have made their mark on history. But what if I were to tell you that nothing involved in this list is even close to the marvels in the Tiberium universe? In a video coming soon, we will discuss the marvel of the GDI Space Distribution Network, but for the meantime, let's discuss perhaps the greatest feat of any planetary-based engineering of all time, one that was done on the orders of Kane, or perhaps Anton Slavic. The Brotherhood Intercontinental and International Tunnel Network, or BITN for short. Featured at the midpoint of the Tiberium series, the BITN first appears in the Tiberian Sun game as a way for Nod to move troops and supplies without being seen by the GDI ion cannon network, in an effort to be able to surprise GDI with their next world domination plan. You see, after the death of Kane in the first game, GDI had won the day, and may have had the effective military dominance across the world, but they did not have the capacity to occupy the areas now under facto Nod control. To complete their victory, they would have needed to occupy those areas, saturate them with their political and counter-religious messaging, as well as countless soldiers as peacekeepers to regulate the formerly war-torn areas into peaceful communities, where GDI could work their liberal sensibilities into these territories. The problem? Somewhere in the ballpark of 1 billion people in the territories of Nod-affiliated Eastern Europe, Near and Middle East, North Africa, some of West and East Asia were devout Nod followers. Followers of a religion that I will call, for the purposes of the video, Canetism. Nearly 1 billion people, loyal to the words of a man purporting to have lived since the time of Cain and Abel, thousands of years ago at least, possessing superhuman levels of charisma. Cain may have been, quote-unquote, dead, but these people were still more loyal to his teachings than they ever were to the concepts of nationhood, outside the nation of Canetism, of course. These were no longer Romanians and Iraqis and Egyptians. These were people of a new faith in the middle of reorganizing themselves into a new quasi-superstate, run by the disparate and fractured regional leadership of Cain's domain. While it is true that some freedom of thought remained, GDI simply lacked the military and logistical capability to tame 1 billion people's devotion to their martyred leader. So GDI did the next best thing, and as they themselves built up for what they considered to be an inevitable next conflict, they took out of the page of Caesar's playbook and played divine and conquer. They covertly supported factions within Nod to prevent their greater mass from coming to a new, competent leadership. Doing this stalled the growth of Nod in other areas. Canetism slowly continued to infect much of the world, but not at the explosive rate that it did before, and once they began to feel settled, GDI began to focus on the abatement of Tiberium, which in the last few years had become such a tremendous problem that trade lanes across the world were cut off, and new dangerous iron storms now plagued the worst-off areas. However, unbeknown to GDI, Kane yet lived, having been injured by the destruction of Temple Prime but not killed. Kane worked with his successor, Anton Slavic, behind the scenes to develop their next plan. The primary hitch? Above-ground troop movements in the numbers that Kane required to make total war on GDI would be seen by the overwhelming space superiority of GDI and their satellite network. So Kane devised a new plan, one that would require going deep underground to travel and transport material and men across the world, to set up for the plan that, if everything went perfectly, would transform the world through divination. But was it really Kane's plan? Certainly everything that happened in Nod stemmed from some greater purpose given by Kane, but I would posit that one of the major things that led to Slavic being loyal to his position as second in command, was likely the conceiving and beginning of the project into years before the First Tiberian War, so massive was the scope of the project. I personally believe that Slavic, through his own network of connections at Nod, began the project and completed most of it in secret, even from most of the other Nod sects, and that the overwhelming majority of it was done before the beginning of the Second Tiberian War. And so the Bitten was created in the years between the end of the First Tiberian War and the start of the Second. And so massive was it that the tunnel stretched almost all the way around the world. Wait, full stop for a second. Just how big was the tunnel network? That is a pretty good question. In Tib's Sun, you as Nod appear in battle nearly anywhere in the world through the use of a tunnel network, and mostly these battles took place in Europe, Africa, and parts of the American continent. Minimum, this is tens of thousands of kilometers of tunnels, ones that run beneath the ocean, because remember from my Tib and the Oceans video, during this period nearly all surfaces of water in the world were covered with Tiberium algae, which caused a lot of issues with shipping and lowered the sea levels across the world. So these tunnels would be incredibly long at minimum. We also have to think about to what extent they would have been built. The battles represented the places that these tunnels must go, but they were not the only places, as Nod had logistical lines that went across the world from country to country, not just in Europe, North Africa, and the Americas, but also in the Near and Middle East. Some of the bastions of his support were in Central Asia and Siberia, where his Siberic army was being constructed, parts of China, which, as we saw in the Chinese involvement in the Tiberium Wars video, was aiding Nod for portions of the duration of the Tiberium Wars. He also had a presence in some of the Nod-affiliated parts of southern and eastern Asia, but not nearly as much, mostly in the formerly Muslim parts of Southeast Asia, which includes large swaths of the Indian subcontinent. Huge portions of Africa, the largest continent, and Arabia as well had Nod factions active. Not all of these areas would necessitate a full installation of the tunnel network, as the war King was attempting to fight would not be fought in China or Arabia or southern Africa, so only light tunnel infrastructure would need to be made. But if merely all of the major cities in northern, eastern, southern, and western Europe, North and South Central America, the Near and Middle East, Pakistan, Central Asia, North Africa, and China would be to be connected, that would mean a minimum of 3 million kilometers of tunnels that needed to be constructed. Likely that number would be higher, as while some areas would only need some tunnels, many others, like Europe, would need to be extremely extensively networked. Let's pick a nice round number and say that at the end of it, network would need to be about 3.5 million kilometers long, or 2.17 million miles. Now, I hear you ask, just how could this project not just be feasible, not even be merely possible, but completed in a mere 10 years? This is getting extra time assuming Slavic started it early enough. No, I have to tell you this would be impossible by today's standards. Probably. Wait, not even probably. 100% impossible. If this would be attempted today, this would be a project that would transcend borders, cost trillions of dollars, require the input of nearly every country in the world, and most likely take decades at least, if not a full century. The logistical efforts to build this would be staggering beyond words, and would require not only a tremendous effort to build not just the tunnels, but also the infrastructure in the tunnels to make sure that the tunnels would not be outright lethal to people that were inside them. Temperatures at some of the depths this would have to reach down into would be quite high, and massive series of air pumping stations would be requiring many power stations that would need to be built to power the pumping stations to fill the tunnels of air. Traveling across massive distances would require days upon days of travel that would require rest stops and accommodation at stops and storage of food, materials for maintenance, and mountains of fuel. More than likely, almost all of the length of the tunnels would be covered in rail lines, using cars or trucks for distances measuring in the thousands of miles would be incredibly inefficient in these vehicles, and transporting goods or troops would be extremely costly without extensive rail infrastructure. But that's not all. Depending on the method used to dig the holes, billions of tons of material would need to be moved and placed somewhere, maybe to make artificial islands or mountains, then you have to occupy some location, moving our ability to use that location for essentially forever. Millions of tons of iron, copper, and other materials must be used to light the tunnels, lay the rails, much of which would be far beyond the ability of even entire countries to supply. No, this would be entirely impossible without at least a century of near total global cooperation and input, and much of the world can't even agree on what measurement system to use, or let alone where the borders of their countries are. 100% impossible. But enter Tiberium, the bifurcation of the world into either Nod or GDI, and MCV technology. It might just be possible. Tiberium is a material that confounds all material science, something obviously created by alien hands to either make the process of extracting valuable minerals from a planet much easier and less time-consuming for civilizations of that scale, or terraforming worlds for ease of colonization, and it does its job quite well. It pulls materials not just from the soil but deep underground and fuses them together into more of itself, which can then be harvested and converted back into usable materials. Large enough shoals can even reach deep enough into the crust of the earth, far beyond what our technology can reach today, to provide for the industry that is required for the project this massive. Nod had the Tiberium processing technology many years ahead of any other faction, and used it to rebuild the parts of the world it is based in to become an industrial powerhouse, capable of producing at similar levels to the West in a fraction of the time it took those same places to become manufacturing giants in history. MCVs, a topic that I will do another video on soon, are technology that will allow on-demand advanced manufacturing where it is supplies of materials derived from Tiberium, and represent the ultimate in manufacturing technology. Combine all these factors with a massive amount of Tiberium under Nod's rule, and you have a recipe for success. Let's ask ourselves about the time it might take for this process to be completed under ideal circumstances. First, the technology most likely to make this work are plasma drills, which are mostly a theoretical technology at the moment, and using some estimation, drills with the ability to drill tunnels of the size that are needed, roughly the size of 2 MCVs running side by side, or as I'm estimating about 20 by 20 meters, to get the best amount of room for transporting materials, would take as much as 30 years to design and construct, and that's just for one. That's under normal construction technology, however. Construction using MCVs would take a significant amount less time, as we see that it takes a very short time to build an MCV relative to the size of the vehicle. Using many different points of beginning and a near exponential level manufacturing scaling, these drills could be completed in a small fraction of the time, and completed the tunnels could be done much faster. In fact, assuming it takes a week to complete a drill using the best MCV tech, the only limit would be the number of MCVs in time. This isn't a practical way of expressing it, but if you started with one drill, produced one every week, doubling the rate at which it produces each week, let's say another MCV is produced as well, then theoretically the entire length of the tunnel could be completed in as little as 15 weeks. It is much more likely the process took several years, as it was done entirely in secret, but the main constraints of this project are secrecy, funding, manufacturing capability and speed, power requirements, and a brain fast enough to plan and design all the parts. For that last bit, we can look, of course, to Kane's second best creation, CABAL, which proved itself to be capable of directing dozens of battles at the same time over the Second Tiberian War. Put this to use on his sole focus, CABAL could finish this in a fraction of the time of it as it would take normal people. Now, is it within range of feasibility? Well, yes. With billions of people lending money, expertise, and Tiberium to the project, whether they know it or not, with Kane and CABAL's direction, the project is possible to complete in the allotted time. An intercontinental rail transportation system spanning millions of miles, only completed in a few years. And when the full might of Nod is put to bear using the system, GDI was almost toppled from the position of total supremacy in the cataclysmic Second Tiberian War. This system gives Nod the ability to strike from anywhere in the world on short notice, giving them a counter to GDI's total supremacy over space in a way that is not possible to totally counter, as At that point, GDI did not have the capability of destroying these tunnels even when they found them. This incredible feat of engineering is almost too much to believe, and overshadows GDI space infrastructure network totally. Next time you play Tib Sun, take a second to reflect on the sheer idiotic brilliance of this construction, and the marvel of Kane's truly messianic ambition. Thank you to all of those who stuck around to the end. Thank you for watching. I hope to do a lot more videos than I did last year. Let's see if I can make that happen. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. This is Game Master Karakin signing off.